Hello and welcome to Piano Talks with Warren Lee, a show dedicated to the art and craft and the nuts and bolts of piano playing across all levels. Some say that the best music is one that speaks for itself. The same is true for piano playing. The piano should talk not only for itself but also for the composer. But before we get there, let me do the talking first. In this podcast, I'll be exploring a piece called La Chevaleresque Op.100 No. 25 by Burgmuller, which is list A1 from ABRSM Grade 5 Piano Syllabus for 2021 and 22. In particular, I'll be looking into the contextual, interpretational, and practical aspects of performing this piece. So, what do we know about the composer Johann Friedrich Franz Burgmuller? Firstly, he was born in 1806 in Regensburg in Germany, which is roughly in the middle of Nuremberg and Munich in the southern half of Germany. The year 1806 might not mean too much to you, so it's good to perhaps put it in perspective here. To start with, the great Beethoven was 36 years old when Burgmuller was born, and his famous Eroica Symphony, his third, was completed in 1804. And the famous Appassionata Sonata, his 23rd, was composed in this period from 1804 to 1806. Burgmuller was born into a musical family. His father was a composer and his mother a pianist and singer. At the age of 26, he moved to settle in Paris, where he developed his light style of playing and improvised hundreds of salon pieces and wrote much piano works for teaching purposes, including the set of 25 etudes Opus 100, from which the piece we have in front of us is taken from. This set of 25 etudes was published in 1852, with each etude bearing a descriptive or what we call programmatic title. These titles, I believe, are here to encourage and help students to visualize and imagine the scene or story that the music is trying to convey. Therefore, it is imperative that we know what such title means from the word go. And if the title is in a foreign language and that a translation isn't given, but it is conveniently given here on all ABRSM materials nowadays, do develop this habit of looking it up. It would only take you seconds to do so on the internet. This particular piece we have here is about a medieval knight who rides in search of chivalrous adventures. And being chivalrous means doing a knightly, a gentlemanly act towards woman. Just from this piece of information, and even without looking at the music, I can already envision some staccatos with certain playfulness, as well as perhaps some dotted rhythms to represent the knight moving about in a sort of royal and gentlemanly manner. After the title, the next hint I look at is the tempo indication, which more often than not tells not only the tempo but also the character of the piece. Here we have Allegro marziale, which means lively and military-like. The given metronome of 126 to a crotchet is suggested by the editor to allow you to be lively. Next, I usually scan through the piece to try to understand the overall structure. For instance, knowing that this piece is in ternary form, which simply stated is ABA, with the returning A section shortened to allow for an extended coda or closing section. One question we must ask when we delve into these analytical details in music is this million-dollar question. So what? So what that this piece is in ternary form? How does that benefit me in playing it better? Well, you must know that music, as in all forms of arts, is all about contrasts and the balance between tension and the resolution of it. So knowing the different sections of a piece gives you a head start in bringing about that very contrast. Let me demonstrate that by playing you just the opening 4 bars from the A section side by side with those of the B section to hear that contrast of character. Our role as performers is to understand how the composer puts together his or her building blocks and translate them into meaningful music. In other words, by creating as much contrast as possible here. The two themes are contrasting because the articulations are obviously different and the keys are also different, with the B section starting off in F major, the subdominant of his home key of C major. Now that we have an understanding of the structure of the piece, let's get into the nitty-gritty details. In addition to playing all the right notes in the correct rhythms, there are other technical and musical aspects that we need to pay attention to in order for us to deliver a convincing and compelling performance. For this particular piece and at this particular level, I would like to focus on 3 things: articulations, dynamics, and phrasing. I'll also point out some other common pitfalls to look out for along the way. In the A section, which is bar 1 to 16, executing the staccatos is the top priority. Some of them are stand-alone staccatos, as in bar 1, 3, 5, and 7. They are relatively easy, but remember that your hands should be jumping off the keys as soon as you hit the bottom of them, like this. But not like this, where you sit on the note first before jumping. There are the other staccatos where they appear at the end of a slur. These must be done in connection to the preceding notes by feeling a downward weight on the preceding note and then jumping off the key on the staccato note in one motion. The slur is a very important marking in music, and I even argue that it is more so than a staccato. Not only should notes under a slur be connected in a legato fashion, they must have a musical direction accordingly. In other words, each note under a slur should have a slightly different degree of gravity. This is what I call gravitational difference. Take bar 9, for example. We have this. Let's just take out the crescendo marking for a second, and we should think about these 7 notes as if a string player is playing them all in one down bow, or think of rolling a ball out on the lawn. You give the momentum to the beginning of the throw, or the down bow, and the momentum carries its way to the end of the roll of the bow, or here, the slur. This way, the staccato should come naturally, tapering off the phrase like this. Now, adding back the crescendo, don't overdo it, or it would risk sounding untasteful. Instead of thinking of an outright crescendo, try thinking about not tapering so much, like this. This then must be followed by the subito piano, that sudden change of dynamic. Together, we should feel an almost comical effect, alternating between loud and soft without any anticipation. Bar 9 to 12 is almost like a contrasting section within the A section itself, with so much drama created by the dynamic changes. Before it gets back to the opening theme in bar 13, try inserting just a breath before the return of the theme, like this. I like to point out one common pitfall here before we go on to the B section. In bars 7 and 15, there's a crescendo marking. Very often, we get excited and anticipate that crescendo by getting loud already at the start of it, like this. But in reality, the crescendo effect is far greater if we start the crescendo in the same dynamic as before, which is piano here. I would suggest that you write in a piano marking at the start of the crescendo so you don't fall into that trap. Isn't this more interesting? In the B section, the composer once again left you with a strong hint that he wanted something different. He wrote piano delicato, asking you to play not only quietly, but delicately so. First of all, our left hand must learn to be more tender in this accompaniment by not accenting the repeated C's on our thumb and playing them as long as possible. Be sure that on the fourth beat, we hear all three notes forming the perfect triad, as oftentimes we let go of the bass notes too soon. The right-hand melody needs to be light, but played melodiously and shaped. And by shaping, I mean to follow the rise and fall of the pitches and do very subtle crescendo and decrescendo to make the phrase sound musical. This is a very important aspect in piano playing. There are crescendo and decrescendo markings written in here as well, but do note that they must be interpreted with delicato in mind. Let's just hear the right hand, beautifully shaped and delicately played, and paying attention to the slurs and how I lift my hand off the keyboard ever so slightly in between slurs. What I do is that I utilize a little bit of elbow movement and flexibility to help smooth out the phrases. Notice that the staccatos return in bar 23 in the left hand, which are written over crotchets instead of quavers. Therefore, they must be noticeably longer than the quaver staccatos that follow in the return of the A section. Let's hear the difference. The balance between the two hands in this B section must also be proportionate to their roles, melody and accompaniment. Let's hear this B section with all these in mind. The return of the A section is identical to the opening 8 bars, but in bar 33 we move to a section called coda, which brings the piece to a climatic end. It seems as if the fireworks are coming out. The difficulty presented here is to keep the pulse constant when we play these different rhythmic divisions. Practicing with a metronome is always a good advice, and particularly so here. Let me isolate and play bar 33, 37, and 40 with a metronome to show you how you can familiarize with the different rhythmic divisions while keeping a constant pulse. The dynamic range in this coda is also the widest of the piece, going from piano to forte and then to fortissimo at the very end. Be sure you have room to go for those last chords, but at the same time, keep them staccato and keep having an upward motion when you play them. Don't bombard those chords with a harsh downward hammer. This is what we don't want, a harsh sound. Instead, this is the fortissimo, the pleasant kind that we are looking for. Even though dynamic markings are given to you fairly meticulously in this piece, I would still go for a finer level of differentiation whenever I come across repetitions in music. One such example is bar 21 and 22 being a slightly altered repetition of bar 17 and 18, being an octave higher. I would not play them exactly the same in terms of dynamics. Likewise, bar 40 and 41 are identical repetitions, and so I'll do something differently in bar 41, but I won't tell you what. I want you to listen out for these places as I now bring to you a complete performance of this piece. Enough of my talking. Let's make your piano talk. And by that, I mean go practice. Thank you for listening to Piano Talks. I'm your host, Warren Lee.